Officer Eli Tran adjusted the stiff collar of his uniform for the 10th time that hour. It wasn't just the fabric, it was the weight of everything it represented. Tonight was his first solo patrol shift. No training officer riding shotgun, no safety net. Just him, his cruiser, and a city that didn't care how green he was. The academy felt like a lifetime ago, even though graduation had been only 3 weeks back. Back then, scenarios were clean. Clear bad guys, obvious threats, instructors waiting just off stage to press pause if things went sideways. Out here, nothing was that simple. The radio crackled to life just after midnight. Dispatch reported a possible suspect near the old rail yard. Male, dark clothing, hood up, acting erratically. Description matched a man seen fleeing a convenience store robbery an hour earlier. Eli's stomach tightened. This wasn't a noise complaint or a lost dog. This was real. He gripped the steering wheel a little harder, knuckles whitening under the dim glow of the dashboard lights. His training officer's voice echoed in his head. Trust your gut, but verify with your eyes. Don't let fear write the script. He drove slowly down the cracked asphalt that bordered the rail yard, tires crunching over loose gravel. Streetlights were sparse here, their yellow halos barely reaching the edges of the road. Then he saw him, a figure standing near a rusted chain-link fence, hands tucked in the pockets of a dark hoodie, shoulders slightly hunched against the cool night air. The man wasn't running, wasn't shouting, just pacing, back and forth like he was waiting for someone or working something out in his head. Eli's pulse thudded in his ears. He pulled over about 30 yards away, killed the headlights, and watched. The man didn't look up, didn't seem to notice the cruiser at all. That should have been reassuring, but it wasn't. In Eli's mind, calm could be a mask. He'd studied enough case files to know that the quiet ones were sometimes the most dangerous. He took a slow breath, checked his vest, and stepped out of the car. Police, he called, voice steadier than he expected. Show me your hands. The figure stopped pacing, turned slowly. Even in the low light, Eli could see the man's face, mid-40s, clean-shaven, eyes calm but alert. No panic, no sudden moves, just a quiet stillness that somehow felt heavier than shouting. Why are you stopping me? The man asked. His tone wasn't hostile. It was measured, almost curious. Eli kept his hand near his holster, not on it, yet. You matched the description of someone involved in a robbery tonight. I need to confirm your identity. The man nodded slightly, like this made perfect sense. Then, without warning, he reached toward his jacket. Don't move, Eli barked, stepping back instinctively. Every muscle in his body locked. His training screamed, hands visible, no sudden motions. But the man's hand was already sliding into his coat pocket. Time seemed to stretch and warp. Eli saw the movement in slow motion. The fabric pulling taut, the angle of the elbow, the way the man's eyes stayed locked on his. In that split second, 1,000 possibilities flashed through his mind. Gun? Knife? Phone? Wallet? It didn't matter. Protocol said, if a threat is perceived and you can't rule it out immediately, you respond. His hand snapped to his sidearm. The click of the holster release was deafening in the quiet night. He drew his weapon. Hands where I can see them. Now. His voice cracked slightly, betraying the fear he was trying so hard to bury. The man froze, not with panic, but with something else. Disappointment, maybe, or concern. He didn't raise his hands right away. Instead, he looked Eli straight in the eye and said quietly but firmly, Stand down. Those 2 words hit Eli like a bucket of ice water. They weren't shouted. They weren't angry. But they carried an authority that cut through the tension like a blade. It wasn't the voice of a suspect. It was the voice of someone used to being obeyed. Slowly, deliberately, the man pulled his hand from his jacket, not holding a weapon but a leather wallet. He flipped it open with one hand and held it up. Inside, beneath the glow of a distant streetlight, Eli saw it. A gold badge. Not just any badge, the kind worn only by top brass. You're new, the man said, not as an accusation but as a statement of fact. Eli's breath caught. His arms trembled. He lowered his gun, but his finger stayed outside the trigger guard, training still holding him together even as his world tilted. Yes, sir, he managed. The man, Chief Darnell Reeves, though Eli didn't know that yet, closed his wallet and slipped it back into his pocket. You followed procedure, he said. But you missed the person. Eli didn't understand at first. Sir? You saw a threat, Reeves continued, stepping closer now, hands relaxed at his sides. But did you see me? Or just the hoodie, the hour, the call? Eli had no answer. His throat felt dry. He wanted to apologize, to explain, to rewind the last 30 seconds, but words wouldn't come. Reeves didn't press. He just stood there, calm as ever, like he'd been through this before. Maybe he had. Go back to your car, he said finally. Log the stop, be honest. And tomorrow, come see me at headquarters. We'll talk. Eli nodded numbly, holstered his weapon with shaking hands, and walked back to his cruiser. He didn't look back, but he could feel the chief's gaze on him all the way. Once inside, he gripped the steering wheel and took deep breaths, trying to steady himself. His uniform felt heavier than ever. Not because of the fabric, but because of what he'd almost done. He hadn't fired. He hadn't even chambered a round. But in his mind, he'd already crossed a line. He'd let fear override observation. He'd assumed the worst before giving the situation a chance to breathe. And the person on the other end of that assumption wasn't some faceless suspect. He was the man who now led the entire department. As he drove away from the rail yard, the city lights blurred through unshed tears of shame and relief. He replayed every second, the way the man turned, the calm in his voice, the quiet disappointment in his eyes. It wasn't anger that haunted Eli. It was the realization that he'd been one twitch away from turning a routine stop into a nightmare. Back at the station, he filled out the report with meticulous care, leaving nothing out. No excuses, no spin, just facts. When he handed it in, the sergeant glanced at it, then at him, and simply said, "You'll hear about it tomorrow." Eli didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his badge on the nightstand. It still gleamed, untouched by scandal, but he knew better. It wasn't about what happened. It was about what almost did. And in that quiet, sleepless hour, he made a promise to himself. Next time, he'd see the person first. Not the threat, not the assumption, the human being, because out here on these streets, that was the difference between being a cop and being a good one. The morning sun barely touched the windows of the precinct when Eli arrived, 2 hours before his shift even started. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the glint of that badge in the dim light, heard those 2 words, "Stand down," echoing like a warning bell. He'd rehearsed a dozen explanations in his head, none of them good enough. What do you say to the person in charge of the entire department when you've pointed a loaded gun at him in the dark? He parked in the far corner of the lot, as if distance could soften what happened. The station buzzed with the usual pre-shift energy, coffee being poured, radios tested, boots scuffing across linoleum. But Eli moved through it like a ghost. He kept his eyes down, shoulders tight, half expecting someone to stop him, call him out, laugh. But no one did. Not yet. At precisely 8:15 a.m., a message popped up on the internal system. Officer Tran, report to Chief Reeves's office. No explanation. No tone, just those words, cold and clean on the screen. His stomach dropped. He stood slowly, smoothed his uniform, useless gesture, but it gave his hands something to do, and walked down the hallway like a man heading to his own sentencing. The chief's office wasn't what he expected. No massive oak desk, no framed awards lining the walls. Just a modest room with a window overlooking the parking lot. A few chairs and a whiteboard covered in notes about community outreach and response times. Chief Reeves sat behind a simple metal desk, sleeves rolled up, reading a report. He looked up when Eli knocked. "Come in," he said. "Not officer, not son. Just come in." Eli stepped inside and stood at attention, hands clasped behind his back. "Sir," Reeves didn't stand. Didn't smile. He just studied him for a long moment, like he was trying to see past the uniform, past the fear, into the person underneath. "Sit," he finally said, gesturing to a chair. Eli sat, perched on the edge like he might need to bolt at any second. "You filed an honest report," Reeves began. "That counts for something," Eli swallowed. "Thank you, sir." "But honesty isn't enough," Reeves continued, leaning forward slightly. "You saw a man in a hoodie near a rail yard after midnight. You got a call about a robbery. You acted on what you were told. That's procedure." Eli nodded, unsure where this was going. "But here's what you didn't do," Reeves said, voice still calm but sharper now. "You didn't ask yourself, could I be wrong? You didn't give space for doubt. You saw emotion, just a hand going into a pocket, and your mind filled in the rest. Gun, threat, danger, and in that moment, you stopped seeing a person. Eli's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to say he was trained to assume the worst, that hesitation gets officers killed, but the words died before they reached his lips, because deep down he knew the chief was right. He hadn't hesitated, he jumped. I thought he was reaching for a weapon, Eli admitted quietly. Did he look like he was? Reeves asked. Really look? Eli hesitated. No, sir, he looked calm. Exactly, Reeves said. Calm isn't a red flag. It's a clue. People who are about to pull a gun don't usually stand still and ask why they're being stopped. They run, they lie, they posture. This man did none of that, and yet you drew your weapon. Silence filled the room. Not the heavy kind, but the kind that makes you listen. To yourself, mostly. Then Reeves did something unexpected. He leaned back and sighed, almost like he was tired. I've been there, he said. Eli looked up, surprised. My third week on the job, Reeves continued, gaze drifting to the window. I stopped a teenager walking home from a basketball game. Hoodie, headphones, hands in pockets. I thought he matched a description from a burglary. I yelled at him to get on the ground. He froze, looked terrified, and when he moved to take off his headphones so he could hear me better, I almost drew my gun. Eli's breath caught. I didn't, Reeves said, but I came close. And that moment stayed with me for 20 years. Not because I did something wrong, but because I almost did. And that almost changed how I saw people after that. Eli didn't know what to say. He'd expected anger, discipline, maybe even a suspension. Not this quiet confession from a man who wore the highest badge in the city. Why are you telling me this? He finally asked. Because you're at a crossroads, Reeves said, meeting his eyes again. You can walk out of here thinking you dodged a bullet, literally and figuratively, and go back to doing things the way you were taught. Or you can ask yourself, what if I'd been wrong last night? And let that question change you. Eli sat there, the weight of those words settling into his bones. It wasn't punishment. It was an invitation. Then Reeves stood. I'm not filing a complaint. I'm not putting anything in your file. But I am asking you to do something. Anything, sir. Help me fix this, Reeves said. Not just for you. For every rookie who's going to stand where you stood last night, heart-pounding, finger-twitching, trying to decide in a split second whether someone lives or dies based on a shadow and a hunch. Eli blinked. Me? Yes, you, Reeves said, a faint smile touching his lips. You felt it, the fear, the pressure, the blur between training and instinct. That's exactly why you're the right person. I want you to work with the training division. Help us redesign the de-escalation module, not from a textbook, from your gut. From last night, Eli's mind raced. He wasn't an instructor. He wasn't even a full-year officer. I don't know if I'm qualified. Qualifications aren't just about time served, Reeves said. Sometimes they're about honesty, and you've got that. For the first time since the night before, Eli felt something other than dread. It was small, fragile, but it was there. Hope. He left the office not with a reprimand, but with a mission. As he walked back through the station, he held his head a little higher. Not because he was proud of what happened, but because he was being given a chance to make sure it never happened again. To anyone. That afternoon, he sat in the training room with a veteran sergeant and a community liaison, sketching out scenarios based on real calls, real fears, real mistakes. He talked about the rail yard, the lighting, the silence, the way his own heartbeat drowned out reason. He described the exact moment he lost sight of the person and saw only the threat. The others listened. Not with judgment, but with nods of recognition. I've been there, the sergeant said. We all have, and that was the point, Eli realized. This wasn't about shame. It was about shared humanity, on both sides of the badge. By the end of the day, they'd outlined a new exercise. Officers would respond to a simulated stop where the suspect behaves calmly, speaks clearly, and reaches for identification. The goal wasn't to test reflexes, but awareness. Could they hold their ground without losing their compassion? As Eli drove home that night, the city looked different. Not safer, not scarier, just more human. Every person on the sidewalk had a story, a reason, a life that didn't fit into a dispatch description. And maybe, just maybe, he could help his fellow officers see that too. He still carried the weight of what almost happened, but now it wasn't dragging him down. It was pushing him forward. The whispers started before Eli even made it to the break room. He heard them in the hallway, low, quick exchanges that stopped the second he turned a corner. At first he thought it was just rookie nerves, his mind playing tricks. But then he caught a phrase, drew down on the chief. Another officer glanced his way and quickly looked down at his coffee. Someone else smirked into their radio log. It wasn't official. No one said it to his face. But the story had spread like smoke through the station, twisted, exaggerated, stripped of context. By lunchtime, the version floating around was that he'd pulled his gun on the chief like he was some street thug, that he froze like a deer when he saw the badge, that he cried in the cruiser. None of it was true, but truth didn't matter much when the rumor had already taken root. Eli kept his head down. He didn't correct anyone. He figured if the chief wanted the story kept quiet, then quiet it would stay. But silence, he soon learned, only fed the fire. At roll call the next evening, a veteran officer, 10 years on the force, thick arms crossed over his chest, leaned over during equipment check and said, "Heard you gave the big man a scare. Hope your trigger finger's steadier next time." The words weren't loud, but they carried. A few chuckles followed. Eli just nodded, tightened his duty belt, and walked away. What hurt more than the jokes was the doubt in people's eyes. The rookies who used to ask him for advice now avoided his gaze. The desk sergeant who once clapped him on the shoulder now handed him call slips without a word. He wasn't being punished, but he wasn't trusted either, and yet every morning he showed up early. Every afternoon he sat in the training room with the sergeant and the community liaison, refining scenarios, testing language, asking hard questions. What if the person doesn't speak English? What if they're having a mental health crisis? What if they're just scared like you were? He poured himself into the work not to prove anything, but because it was the only thing that made the shame feel useful. Then came the day the chief called him back into the office. This time, Reeves didn't look tired. He looked focused. On his desk sat a thick folder labeled Field De-Escalation Pilot Program. "We're rolling this out next month," Reeves said, tapping the folder. "You'll co-lead the first session with Sergeant Ruiz. It's mandatory for all new recruits and optional for veteran officers." Eli's stomach flipped. "Optional? Most of them won't come." "Maybe," Reeves said, "but some will. And the ones who do, they're the ones who matter." He paused, then added, "I've heard the talk, by the way." Eli stiffened. "Sir?" "The rumors. The jokes. The rookie who almost shot the chief." Reeves said it flatly, no anger, no embarrassment. "Let them talk. What you're building here is bigger than gossip." That night, Eli lay awake again, but not from fear. From something else, a quiet kind of resolve. He wasn't going to hide from what happened. He was going to stand in front of a room full of officers, some skeptical, some hostile, some just tired, and tell them exactly how close he came to making a terrible mistake. Not to shame himself, but to wake them up. The day of the first session arrived. The training room was half full. Most of the faces were fresh, recruits with crisp uniforms and nervous energy. But in the back row, arms crossed, sat 3 veteran officers, including the one who'd mocked him at roll call. Eli took a breath. He didn't start with rules or policy. He started with the rail yard. He described the chill in the air, the way his boots crunched on gravel, the exact shade of the streetlight that barely touched the man's face. He talked about the split second when his training kicked in, but his judgment didn't. He admitted how his fear painted a threat where there wasn't one. How he saw a hoodie, not a human. "I didn't know it was the chief," he said, voice steady. "But that's not the point. The point is, I shouldn't have needed a badge to stop me. I should have seen the person first." Silence. Then, from the back, one of the veterans spoke up. "So what, you're saying we should hesitate?" Eli shook his head. "I'm saying we should see. Hesitation gets people hurt, but assumption gets people killed. There's a difference." He walked them through the new exercise, a simulated stop where the civilian is calm, cooperative, but reaches for ID without announcing it. "Your job isn't just to control the situation," he said. "It's to understand it." After the session, most of the recruits lingered, asking questions. One young woman said, "I've been so scared of making a mistake, I almost quit last week. Thank you for showing us it's okay to be human." But the real surprise came later. As Eli was packing up his notes, The veteran who'd mocked him stepped forward. He didn't apologize, didn't smile, but he said, "I've drawn my weapon 3 times in 12 years. Twice I was wrong. I never told anyone. Maybe I should have." Then he nodded and walked out. That small moment hit Eli harder than any praise. It wasn't about him being forgiven. It was about someone else feeling safe enough to admit their own near misses. Over the next few weeks, more veterans started showing up, not all, but enough. Some came just to watch. Others participated. One even shared a story about stopping an elderly man who fit the description of a suspect, only to find out he was walking to the pharmacy to pick up heart medication. The program wasn't perfect. Some officers still rolled their eyes. Some called it soft, but slowly something shifted. The language changed. Compliance became connection. Control became clarity. And Eli? He stopped walking with his shoulders hunched. He stopped flinching at whispers. Because he realized something. The moment he pointed his gun at the wrong man didn't define him. What he did after, that's what mattered. One evening, as he locked up the training room, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Keep going. You're changing more than you know." He didn't need to ask who it was from. He looked out the window at the city lights. Hundreds of stories unfolding under the same sky. Each one worthy of being seen, not just scanned. And for the first time since that night at the rail yard, he felt like he belonged, not just in the uniform, but in the world it was meant to serve. 3 months had passed since that night at the rail yard, and the department felt different, not because of new rules or top-down orders, but because something quieter had taken root. Officers started talking to each other about close calls, not as war stories, but as lessons. The training room, once used mostly for firearms drills and policy reviews, now buzzed with conversations about tone of voice, body language, and the space between fear and judgment. And at the center of it all was Eli, still a rookie by rank but no longer treated like one. He'd just wrapped up another session with a group of mid-career officers when Sergeant Ruiz pulled him aside. "Chief wants to see you," she said, handing him a coffee. "And don't look so nervous. You're not in trouble. You're part of the solution." Eli nodded, but his stomach still fluttered. No matter how many times he walked into that office now, the memory of drawing his weapon in the dark never fully faded. It was like a scar, no longer raw but always there, reminding him. Chief Reeves was standing by the window when Eli entered, arms crossed, watching the parking lot below. "You've done good work," he said without turning around. "Better than I expected." Eli wasn't sure how to respond, so he just said, "Thank you, sir." Reeves turned then, his expression unreadable. "But it's not enough," Eli blinked. I thought the feedback's been positive. Even some of the toughest guys are using the new approach on calls." "It is positive," Reeves said, walking back to his desk. "But real change doesn't happen in a training room. It happens on the street. And right now the public doesn't know any of this is happening. They still see us as a wall, not a bridge." He sat down and gestured for Eli to do the same. "I want to take this program public, not as a press release, not as a photo op, but as a real conversation with the people we serve." Eli frowned. "You mean, invite civilians into the training?" "More than that," Reeves said. "I want you to lead a community demo. Show them how a stop should go. Let them ask questions. Let them see that we're not just teaching officers to be tougher, but to be more human." The idea made Eli's palms sweat. He'd stood in front of fellow officers, sure. But civilians? People who'd been stopped unfairly. Who'd lost trust in uniforms like his. That was different. "What if they think it's just theater?" he asked. "Like we're putting on a show to look good? Then we make it real," Reeves said simply. "No scripts, no actors. Just you, a volunteer from the community, and an honest scenario. If it feels staged, it fails. But if it feels true, it might start healing something." The event was scheduled for a Saturday morning at the community center downtown. Flyers went up in local shops, announcements were made at neighborhood meetings, and social media posts were carefully worded, not to defend the department, but to listen. The morning of, Eli arrived early. His uniform was clean, his notes organized, but his hands wouldn't stop trembling. He paced near the stage setup, a simple street scene marked with chalk lines, a mock cruiser, a bench. Nothing fancy. Just enough to feel real. People started arriving before 9, Not just the usual concerned citizens, but shop owners, parents, teenagers, even a few folks who'd been vocal critics of the police. Some looked skeptical, others curious. A few just seemed tired, like they'd seen too many promises break before. Eli took a deep breath and stepped forward. He didn't start with a speech. He started with a confession. "I'm Officer Tran," he said, voice quiet but clear. "3 months ago, I pointed my gun at a man who turned out to be my chief. I didn't know who he was. All I saw was a threat, and in that moment I forgot to see the person." A murmur rippled through the room. No one had expected that. "I'm not proud of it," he continued, "but I'm grateful for it because it forced me to ask, how many times have I done that without realizing? How many times have I let fear write the story before the person even spoke?" He paused, then introduced the demo. A local barber, someone known in the neighborhood, volunteered to play the civilian. Eli would approach him as if responding to a vague call about suspicious activity. The scenario began simply. Eli walked up, hand near, but not on his belt. "Hey, sir. Mind if I ask what you're doing here?" The barber, calm but wary, replied, "Just waiting for my nephew. He's running late from school." Eli nodded. "Got it. We've had some reports of loitering in this area, so I'm just checking in. You mind showing me some ID?" The man reached slowly into his jacket, and right there, on purpose, Eli paused. Didn't flinch. Didn't reach for his weapon. Just watched, waited, and said, "Take your time." The room was dead silent. When the barber pulled out his wallet, Eli smiled slightly. "Thanks, all good. Have a good day." Then he turned to the audience. "That's it. No shouting. No commands. Just clarity and respect. Because most people aren't hiding something. They're just living their lives." Afterward, the questions came fast. "What if he had pulled a weapon?" someone asked. "Then I respond," Eli said. "But I don't assume, I assess." "There's a difference," another voice. "Do all officers train like this now?" "Not yet," Eli admitted. "But we're trying. And we need your help. If you see an officer who's calm, who listens, tell someone. If you see one who isn't, tell us that too. We can't fix what we don't know is broken." An older woman raised her hand. "My son was stopped last year. They threw him against the car for no reason. He still won't walk home alone at night. How do I trust this isn't just words?" Eli met her eyes. "You don't, not yet. Trust isn't given, it's earned. And we've got a long way to go. But today, this is a start." Later, as people milled around, some stayed to talk. A teenager asked Eli how he stays calm when his heart's racing. A shop owner thanked him for not hiding behind jargon. The barber clapped him on the shoulder and said, "You just gave my nephew a little more hope." When it was over, Eli sat on the steps outside, exhausted but lighter than he'd felt in months. Chief Reeves appeared beside him, holding 2 bottles of water. "You didn't just teach them something," he said, handing one over. "You reminded them we're people too." Eli twisted the cap off and took a long drink. "I was scared they'd hate me." "Some still might," Reeves said. "But you showed up anyway. That's courage." Back at the station that night, something small but significant happened. A call came in about a man acting strange near the bus stop, hoodie, pacing, talking to himself. Dispatch flagged it as low priority, but Eli recognized the description instantly. Same rail yard, same hour. He volunteered to respond. When he arrived, he saw the man, older this time, unshaven, holding a crumpled paper bag. Not a suspect, just someone lost in thought, maybe struggling with something no one could see. Eli didn't approach with his hand near his weapon. He walked up slowly, kept his voice low, and said, "Evening. You doing okay?" The man looked up, surprised. Then after a beat, he nodded. "Just waiting for the 10:15, lost my schedule." Eli smiled. "It's running late tonight. Want to wait inside the station? It's warmer." The man hesitated, then said, Yeah, that'd be good." As they walked back to the cruiser, not to arrest, not to detain, but to offer a ride, the streetlights cast long shadows. But this time Eli didn't see threats. He saw stories. And for the first time, he felt like he was part of one worth telling. The academy classroom smelled like fresh coffee and nervous energy. Rows of new recruits sat stiffly in their chairs, eyes fixed on the front of the room, uniforms still crisp from the box. Most of them hadn't walked a single solo patrol yet. They'd spent weeks memorizing codes, practicing takedowns, learning how to clear a room. But today's lesson wasn't about any of that. Today was about the space between seeing and understanding. Eli stood at the front, Not behind a podium, just leaning against a table with a cup of coffee in hand. He wore his uniform, but he'd rolled up the sleeves, a small rebellion against formality. He didn't look like an instructor. He looked like someone who'd been through something and lived to talk about it. "I'm not here to teach you how to be perfect," he began, voice low but steady. "I'm here to tell you how I almost wasn't." He didn't start with policy, didn't quote procedure. He told them about the night near the rail yard, the chill in the air, the way his boots crunched on gravel, the exact second his training overrode his judgment. He described the weight of the gun in his hand, the dryness in his throat, the way time seemed to stop when the man in the hoodie said, "Stand down." "I thought I was doing my job," Eli said, "but I wasn't. I was reacting to a story I made up in my head. And the person on the other end of that story, he wasn't a suspect. He was my chief. But even if he'd been anyone else, a delivery driver, a father walking home, a teenager lost after curfew, it wouldn't have mattered. Because what I almost did wasn't about who he was. It was about who I chose to be in that moment." The room was silent. Not the kind of silence that means boredom, but the kind that means people are listening with their whole selves. One recruit raised a hand. "What if you'd been right? What if he had been the robber?" Eli nodded. "Then I'd still have to live with how I got there. Did I give him a chance? Did I see him as a person first? Or did I just see a threat and pull the trigger on my assumptions?" He walked them through the new de-escalation exercise, not as a drill, but as a mindset. Your job isn't just to control a situation. It's to understand it. And you can't understand someone if you've already decided who they are. After the session, a young woman hung back. She looked no older than 20, eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes from knowing how much is at stake. "I keep having nightmares," she admitted quietly, "about making a mistake that can't be undone." Eli didn't offer empty reassurance. "You will make mistakes," he said gently. "Everyone does. The question isn't whether you'll slip. It's whether you'll learn from it, and whether you'll let it change how you show up the next time." She nodded, tears glistening but not falling. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not pretending it's easy." Later that afternoon, Eli walked past the chief's office and saw him standing by the window again, arms crossed, watching the parking lot. Reeves turned as Eli passed and gave a small nod. No words needed. It was enough. But the real moment came a week later. Eli was off duty, grabbing groceries after a long shift, when he saw a young officer from the latest academy class standing near the bus stop outside the store. The officer was talking to an older man, hoodie, cane, grocery bag in hand. From a distance it looked tense. The officer's hand hovered near his belt. The man looked confused, maybe frustrated. Eli's first instinct was to step in, but he held back. Instead, he watched. The young officer took a breath, lowered his hand, said something Eli couldn't hear, but the man's shoulders relaxed. A few seconds later, they were both laughing. The officer even helped the man carry his bag to the bench. Eli didn't say anything. He just walked back to his car, heart full in a way he hadn't expected. That night, he sat on his porch, the city humming in the distance. He thought about how far he'd come, not just as an officer, but as a person. He used to think courage was about drawing your weapon fast, standing your ground, never showing fear. Now he knew better. Real courage was lowering your weapon when everything in you screamed to raise it. It was admitting you were wrong. It was showing up again and again, even when you're scared you'll fail. A few days later, the department held its first joint community academy open house. Civilians sat alongside recruits, role-playing scenarios, asking hard questions, sharing stories. A teenager played the part of an officer stopping someone suspicious. An elderly woman played the civilian and gently corrected the recruit when he used too much force in his tone. Eli watched from the back of the room, arms crossed, just like the chief used to do in there. Near the door stood Chief Reeves, quiet, observing, a faint smile on his face. He caught Eli's eye and gave a single nod. Not of approval, of pride, because this wasn't just about avoiding a scandal. It was about building something new, something human. Months later, the program Eli helped create became mandatory for every new officer in the city. Veteran officers started requesting refresher sessions, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And slowly, quietly, the call started changing. Fewer use of force reports, more resolutions that ended with a handshake, not a handcuff. Eli never became famous, He didn't get a medal or a promotion. He just kept showing up. On the street, in the classroom, in the quiet moments between calls. And that was enough. Because real change doesn't happen in headlines. It happens in the space between a hand reaching into a pocket and an officer choosing to wait to see. To remember that behind every shadow, every hoodie, every late-night call, there's a person, just like him. And that's the story worth telling.